Dale, you did it again. Sylvie, Andrew, got Phil up in Glasgow, Linda there, Julie, Carmel, Caroline Day, we've got Ken James, we've got Frank out there in the US, Gordon Berry's in the house. Who else have we got? Johanna's, Andy Donovan up in Leeds, I think it was, wasn't it? Or was it Sheffield? Sheffield, yes.
Sheffield.
Liz Martin, Grant out in Spain.
Deborah Workman's just coming in from the US.
Yeah, can't see anybody else, but I can only see people who join with video. So there might be other people here on audio only. I only really want to see the people that are out on video. Who we got there at the bottom there? Sandra. I think that's probably Tim Morrell. Yeah, I thought it was. Roger's here. Mavis Kerrigan. Good, nice full house. Well, I'm happy to say that the rains have come to Richmond. Although I was watching it in the news, and it was saying it was flooded in London. We got torrential rain and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like 10 miles outside of central London, and we had a bit of drizzle. That was it. I was thinking, where do they get these pictures from? Maybe that's a question for another session.
It's chucked it down in West Hampstead.
Is it? Yeah. Well, it's been chucking it down this afternoon, which is now cleared the air, which is I'm delighted about, because it was just getting too hot and too oppressive. So here we are, session 7, decisions. And I read this chapter, as I said before. Oh, just a little bit of housekeeping. If you can keep your microphone on mute during the session. It is being recorded on another computer in speaker view, so that I like to see all of you here. But the recording will be of just whoever's speaking, which most of the time should be me. And then we'll have time for Q&A. If you want to put any questions you have into the chat, then Sally will correlate those. And then when I've finished my teaching bit, we'll then move to the Q&A section, and Sally will stage manage all of that and ask you to ask your question. So unmute your microphone as you ask the question, and then obviously mute it again whilst I answer it. So this was a good chapter, and obviously what we're doing here is we're looking at Think and Grow Rich, a classic from the 1920s, 1930s, and looking at it from a 2022 viewpoint, from a real world NLP and HUNA viewpoint. And this, my thing for this particular one is that there's a lot that we can update in this chapter, not so much from a real world HUNA perspective, but definitely from a real world NLP perspective. So, one of the key things that Napoleon Hill's talking about here is about taking decisions, making decisions, and making them quickly, and comparing that with procrastination. So I think from an NLP point of view, we can actually differentiate those two things, because in my opinion, they're actually different. So not making a decision and procrastinating are different. They're not the same thing. And we have a solution for both of them from an NLP and a timeline therapy perspective. But we want to make sure that we identify what the presenting problem is really before we actually use the particular intervention. So procrastination is a state. It's an emotional state. It's a stuck state. So you could have somebody who's made a decision to do something, but then because they're in this stuck state of procrastination, they don't take action. Whereas we could have somebody, and our intervention of choice from an NLP point of view, if we've got somebody who has made a decision, but then they're not taking action, as in they're stuck in procrastination, then, with NLP, which we teach in our practitioner training, is chaining anchors. That's how we chain somebody from the state of procrastination to motivation. Now, somebody who's not making decisions isn't somebody who's in a state of procrastination. More than likely, from a meta programs point of view and from a Myers-Briggs point of view, and there's a very close correlation between the Myers-Briggs type indicator and the basic meta programs. With the adaptation operator, somebody who's more judger or somebody who's more perceiver, somebody who is more judger will find it easy to make decisions very, very quickly. And as Napoleon Hill actually says in the chapter, what they tend to do is they stick to that decision to make the world fit their decision. Whereas the other side of the scale, somebody who's more perceiver, don't find it easy to make decisions because their perception is that when they make a decision, they reduce their options and they want to keep their options open. So what they'll do is they will only ever make a decision at the last minute. Now, that could look like procrastination, and it's not. The perceiver, once they've made a decision, will actually take action, whereas somebody who's in the state of procrastination, whether they're a judger or a perceiver, won't do it all. So if you've got somebody who's more perceiver, and therefore they are indecisive, not making a decision, or leaving it to the last minute, then the intervention of choice is actually to assist them in changing the direction of their timeline, because there's a very high correlation between adaptation operator of judger with through time timeline, where the timeline, the past, the present, and the future is out in front of them, and a very high correlation with somebody of an adaptation operator of perceiver having their timeline front to back, as in the future's out in front of them, now's inside of them, and the past is behind them. Now, so it's important for ourselves, if you're just looking at this from a purely personal development, personal effectiveness perspective, which one of those two perspectives is it? Is it the state of procrastination, like Napoleon Hill talks about, or is it the state of non-decision? Now, it could be both. So you might have somebody who's got an in-time timeline as an adaptation operator of perceiver, and also get stuck in the stuck state of procrastination, in which case, whether you're working on yourself or you're working with a client around this, you'd have to do both. You'd have to assist them in changing their timeline around and also getting them out of the stuck state of procrastination. The thing that Napoleon Hill talks about in the book is that, you know, he went out to several hundred people who had created millions of wealth, and he found that all of them, you know, the correlation with them is that they made decisions really quick, and then they stuck to those decisions. Although they made the decision, his words, they made a decision quickly and were slow to change the decision. That is from our NLP, our meta programs perspective, would be a judger trait, a through time trait. And, you know, the Myers-Briggs organization with their MBTI profiling instrument said that what they'd found is that the majority of people who were successful in business were what they would call STJs, sensors, as in they were into the detail, thinkers, as in they thought about things rather than being emotional, and judges, as in the thing that we've just talked about, as in making decisions quickly and making the world fit their decision rather than making their decision fit the world. So that's how the first thing that Napoleon Hill says fits into NLP meta programs. Then he also says about not talking about your decisions openly because of people being swayed in their decision by other people's opinions. Now, again, we can relate this to meta programs. This would relate to the frame of reference meta program. So somebody, and with frame of reference meta program, what we've got is somebody who's totally internally referenced, as in, you know, their entire reference is inside of them. They're not even aware of what anybody else is giving them as feedback. The other extreme on that would be somebody who's totally external frame of reference. And somebody who's total external frame of reference will be a little bit like a reed in the wind. Because somebody who's externally referenced, whatever somebody else says to them, as in, well, I think you should do this, they'll go, I'll do that. Then somebody the next day or even later that day says, well, I think you should do this. Then they go, well, I'll do that. So that there's no kind of like, well, there's no internal reference. So those are the kind of people with that meta program that would need to be careful about who they share their goals with. Equally, though, totally internal frame of reference also doesn't work for different reasons, because somebody who's totally internal frame of reference isn't aware of the feedback they're getting from the external world, and they'll just plow on, you know, head down like a bull in a china shop. One of the most effective meta programs would be internal with an external check, which is where the person's got a true internal guidance, but then what they'll do is they'll check with the outside world to get some feedback on that, though they'll give a greater weighting to the inside than the outside. That's a really important distinction there. So I think, you know, what we've talked about last week with what Napoleon Hill called organizational planning, then the internal, somebody who's totally internal, excuse me, somebody who's totally internal won't check outside to see if what the action they're taking is working or not. They'll just plow on. I'm going to make this work. Now, all of these meta programs, we can change. So, if you realize, whoa, I think I'm more externally referenced than internally referenced, and that might be something that's caused me a bit of a problem. Then, somebody who's totally externally referenced as a limiting decision about being able to trust themselves, being able to trust their own knowing, or what we call in Huna their own Na'au, N-A'-A-U. Whereas somebody who's totally internally referenced has a limiting decision about not being able to trust other people. And those are just limiting decisions, limiting beliefs, which with our NLP skills and with our timeline therapy skills, mental emotional release skills, we can actually change any of those. Now, so here's the other thing that came to mind when I was reading this this chapter. Is about another meta program called Information Processing Style, where we've got somebody who's a totally internal processor. When they're working through something, they can't talk to anybody else about it. They have to go into their own little world. They have to isolate themselves, shut themselves away, and work it out for themselves. And once they've worked it out for themselves, they're done. Whereas an external processor, to get to that point of, paradoxically, to get to that point of internal resolution, they have to go external and talk to other people. So they have to talk. So these are the kind of people that when they're processing about, a decision, if we're looking at what Napoleon Hill's talking about, they would have to go and talk to other people about that, to externalize it, to get to the point where they go, okay, this is what I'm going to do. Now, this is regardless of whether they're in a state of procrastination or motivation, or regardless of whether they are more judger or perceiver, or more internally or externally frame of reference. So there's a number of things here from an NLP point of view that we need to look at from an interrelations side of things. Now, I think, and again, all of these things with NLP, we can change if we recognize that as being a presenting problem, which is causing us a problem in the context of making decisions and sticking to decisions. Now, one of my early mentors, and I think I've mentioned it in some of the earlier masterclasses, Stuart Wilde. And by the way, whilst I think about it, the first book that I read by Stuart Wilde was The Trick to Money is Having Some. Yeah, Stuart Wilde's The Trick to Money is Having Some. Which I really now, and I thought about it, it just came to mind when I was thinking, like Think and Grow Rich. It's kind of like Stuart Wilde's version of Think and Grow Rich in a way. It's a great read. I love Stuart. I got to know him quite well as a personal friend of mine. But one of the things that he said, Stuart Wilde used to say, was that when you make when you create a goal, and I think this is what Napoleon Hill's talking about by making a decision. He's talking about making a decision about what you want and when. Stuart actually said that whenever you make a decision and decide upon a goal, always keep it to yourself and never tell anybody, was Stuart Wilde's perspective on it. And this was his rationale around that. He had a couple of things. He said, as soon as you verbalize the goal to somebody else, you give some of that goal's energy away by verbalizing it. Plus, he said also, by actually saying the goal out loud, your unconscious mind might actually believe that you've already achieved the goal and therefore not do anything about it. So this is why, Stuart Wilde actually said, when you set major, significant personal goals, he would actually say, do not tell anybody about it at all. He was quite black and white as far as that's concerned. I don't know if I'd necessarily be so black and white, but you see, here's the other thing about this is that your unconscious mind is very sensitive. And let's say that you voice your goal, your decision to somebody else, and that other person either doesn't believe that you can achieve it, whether they say it or not, your unconscious mind will pick that up. And that will start to sow the seeds of doubt into your unconscious mind. Even worse, it might be the person goes like, oh, come on, David, there's no way you're ever going to achieve that. That goes in as a suggestion. There's also the potential that you might tell somebody what your goal is, and for whatever reason, they don't want you to achieve it. Whether it's from jealousy, or whether it's from, if you were to achieve it, you would show them up, or whatever it is, then that in some way, shape, or form, your unconscious mind will pick up. It might be picked up in their physiological change. It might be picked up in their voice tonality. It might be picked up in their energy, because, no matter whether we're into energy or not, from a Huna perspective, consciously, our unconscious minds are aware of energy. And, when you share a goal with somebody and your unconscious mind senses their energy shifts, then your unconscious mind might go, oh, maybe it's the wrong goal, or maybe I can't do that, or maybe it's not okay for me to do that. So I think that's my take on Napoleon Hill's point about being quiet. I mean, he talks about being quiet about the decisions you make around your goals. As I say, Stuart Wilde would say, be silent about the goals you say, about the goals you set. Then I think the next thing, which is important, and this is what my take on what Napoleon Hill's talking about in this chapter, is that when you make big decisions, i.e. you make a decision about setting yourself a big goal, that's going to take courage to take action and execute on. And and he actually, Napoleon Hill actually in the chapter says, are you willing to die for this decision? If you make big decisions and you go like, which, a lot of people would say, if you make decisions around your goals and it doesn't have a, what some people might call a squeaky bum moment, then your goals aren't big enough. So then to actually follow through on that decision is going to take courage, what some people might call bravery. And, a misunderstanding, I think, around courage or bravery is that, a lot of people think that somebody who's courageous, somebody who's brave, has no fear. No, that's a psychopath. Somebody who's brave and courageous most definitely has fear. And, it's that line, I can't remember which book it was from now, feel the fear and do it anyway, is about courage and about bravery and about being a hero. that what people who perceive as being a hero, isn't those people don't have fear. They're not fearless. They do have fear. And they take action anyway. And I think that's the thing that Napoleon Hill's talking about there. Interestingly, one of my clients, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this in the group, because I'd love you to help him out with this. And I know you're all like-minded people like me, and I've done this. His name's Kyle Herman, and he's put together a survey specifically about being courageous. And it's actually, I've done the survey, and it's very, very, very well constructed, and it's a proper survey. So it's almost like a survey which is designed with double blinds in it. I'm not saying it's a complete random control trial, but it's a very, very well structured survey. So I'll put the link up for Kyle's Being Courageous survey in the group. And he is one of my clients, as a friend of mine. And if you'd be willing to do that, it's anonymous, so it's like it's not going to go anywhere. That would be really great. And I think that really ties in with what we're talking about here with Napoleon Hill's ideas about decisions. Then I think that the final thing with this, from Napoleon Hill's point of view, is making sure that the decisions that you make are in alignment with your desires, are backed up with your faith. So you've got a decision which is in alignment with your desires and backed up with your faith in yourself that you can make it happen. And I think this is a nice lineup for next week's session, which is on persistence. Because persistence is what is needed to get you over the hurdle from not having faith to having faith. So each chapter, I think if you notice that they're kind of like they're very nicely building up upon each other. So that's my take on Napoleon Hill's 7th lesson on decisions. So I'm going to open up the floor now to see if we've got any questions on any of that. It's a very NLP-ish session this week. Some of the chapters are more Hoonerish, and some of them are more NLP-ish. So, Sally, do we have any questions so far? I can see there's quite a large number of things in the chat.
We do. We have a question from Yvonne.
Yvonne.
Yes.
Hello.
Whereabouts? Yeah, wave at me, Yvonne. I can see you. Yes. Hi, Yvonne.
Hello. I was wondering about the fear and procrastination, and I was wondering, how basically do you tell them apart if someone is not taking action, or obviously asking for a friend? But yeah, if I'm not doing something, how can I tell which one of the two it is?
Well, fear. Let's think about some different labels for fear. Could be scared, worried, anxious, afraid it might go wrong, afraid it might go right. Because when we make big decisions and then we take action on them, it might all go horribly right, and there are consequences to achieving big goals. So whereas procrastination is what we call in NLP a stuck state, where there's no fear there. There's no worry there. There's no concern there. It's just the person's stuck. So what you could think of, and this is different ways, I'm just processing it myself. So this is just my model of the world on it. Fear, even though it stops you from taking action, the emotion is actually moving. Whereas with procrastination, it's not moving. That's the problem. It's like stationary. I think the other thing is that procrastination, although it stops people and has people become stuck, so they're not doing anything, actually might not be particularly intense from an emotion point of view, whereas fear can be quite intense. So that's how I would personally differentiate between the two, and therefore know what I was going to do to do it. Now, if somebody was more perceiver and they're faced with a big decision, and they have anxiety about making the decision, because they're going, what by making this decision, what happens if I make this decision and then there's a better option comes along, and because I've taken this earlier decision, I miss out on this better option. What they don't realize is that until they actually pick an option, they actually have none. So again, but the anxiety that somebody experiences from being more in-time perceiver gradually increases to the point where they realize that they've got to make a decision. And then they make the decision, and then they're anxious as to whether it was the right one or not, which is different than procrastination, which is also different than fear. So those are the kind of like finer level distinctions from an NLP, a timeline therapy, and mental emotional release perspective, for us to know what would be the intervention of choice for our friend that was experiencing that problem. Does that answer your question,
Yeah.
Yvonne?
Yeah, I think our friend needs to deal with her fear.
Okay. Well, that you know,
Thank you.
With what we know in NLP and timeline therapy, mental emotional release, and HUNA, dealing with the fear, or dealing with the anxiety, or dealing with the limiting belief, or dealing with the procrastination is the easy bit. It's actually identifying what the actual problem is first. And that appears like what your friend's done. So now it's easy. Whereas I think what a lot of people do in our field of NLP and timeline therapy, mental emotional release, and HUNA, they go like, oh, that's procrastination. We've got a technique for that. It's a bit like Apple. We've got an app for that. Or they go, oh, well, that's a limiting belief. We've got something for that. But if we don't marry up the appropriate intervention with the appropriate presenting problem, then it will appear not to have worked. Yeah. Whereas it's not the intervention that didn't work, it wasn't the right intervention. So as soon as you've identified the appropriate thing to do, the rest is easy. Yeah, changing it is easy. That's my experience of working with people, and also working on myself for 30 or more years. It's actually going, okay, what is actually the problem? Yeah.
Yeah, the fear of actually succeeding. You
okay.
you had it there.
Yep. Yep. And a lot of people go like, oh, it's fear of failure, fear of failure, fear of failure. I find it's as much fear of success as fear of failure. Oh, because, you know, setting big goals, making big decisions, and then we make it happen, comes with consequences. Everything we do comes with consequences. And it's being willing and able to let go of the consequences of being successful. Yeah, no, fantastic. Well done, everyone.
Thank you.
Sally, you're there.
Okay, Linda, you're up with your question, please.
Linda, yep.
Hi, David.
Hi, Linda.
Being an ENTJ in Myers-Briggs, so therefore the extrovert in me, when I come up with my big visions, I need to talk things out so I can almost hear myself think. And it has cost me. And I think you've just answered yet another one of my life questions, which is why have some of my big visions not come right for me, but they have for the other people that I've discussed them with, as in I've had things pinched, etc.
Yeah.
I've had everything from resentment and all of those things that you mentioned. So is that my extrovert side of me is, if you like, convincing my subconscious I can't do it or it's not right for me, but I'm giving the energy away and somebody else is picking that up and who has the money to make the things happen. And that's the way it tends to go.
Yeah. So I wouldn't necessarily say that, you know, if we look to the definition of introvert and extrovert, introvert is somebody that when they are really tired, really, you know, wrung out, they go home and close the door and they're by themselves or with people that they're very close to. Whereas an extrovert, when they're feeling really tired and really wrung out, they go out and party. So what you could have is, you know, you could have an introvert so that when they're tired and they, you know, they want to go and close the door and be on their own or whatever. But they could also have an external frame of reference. Mm-hmm. Where what they want to do is they want to check with other people, yes, as to what their opinions are around it, rather than just knowing it internally. Equally, you could have somebody who's an introvert with a internal frame of reference, but it's also an external processor. Mm. And to process it for themselves, they have to externalize it.
Yes.
So it could be a number of things, not necessarily just extrovert. Mm. So then you go like, okay, so what do you do if you're an external processor and you want to be quiet about your goals? Well, one is obviously from an NLP point of view, we can change that. But also what we can do if somebody's more of an external processor, let's say they're an external processor and they don't have anybody to externally process with. Mm. You know, that's a possibility over, you know, particularly over lockdown and all that kind of thing, is to journal, is to write it out, because that's a process of externalization.
Yes. Because
somebody who's an external processor actually isn't interested in what the other person says.
True.
So what they'll do is like, oh, I've got this problem. Can you help me work it out? And the person goes like, yeah, cool. Sit down, you know, get yourself a coffee. And the external processor goes, okay, great. Thanks. Fantastic. Thanks for your help. Got it. The other person going, I didn't even get to fucking say anything. What do you mean? Thanks. So that's the distinction between those three. It's a fine distinction between those three meta programs. Again, on c21nlp.com, there is a full video training in the meta programs and the interrelation between them. And there's about 20 meta programs, and each video is about 30 minutes. So it's about a 10-hour training in meta programs in C21 and LP. But those are the distinctions that, you know, because a lot of people are like, well, it's just because you're an extrovert. Not necessarily. It could be also frame of reference. It could also be information processing style. And then therefore the way of dealing with that, fixing that, is different depending on which one it is.
Yeah. What I heard in what you were sharing earlier was am I therefore convincing my unconscious mind? Because I know when I get these things, they are right and they're always right. But something goes on. I think what you said was I can then convince my unconscious mind either not to make it happen, or I've let it out and that weakens it for me.
Yeah, so that would be more from Stuart Wilde's perspective of being able to make a decision, set a goal, and not needing to tell or talk to anybody else about it.
Yeah.
Or, you know, what Napoleon Hill talks about, which we'll come to in a future session, is about, if you are going to talk to people about it, being careful who you talk to about it. And he talks about only talking to your mastermind group.
Yeah.
And as we'll discover when we get to that session, he's already talked about mastermind group a number of times. It isn't what the majority of people today believe a mastermind group is. It's actually very, very different. But we'll leave that for a future session.
Good.
Does that answer your question, Linda?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you.
Brilliant.
I'll stop talking.
Okay, Chatty Phil, you're up. Mr. Phil Atkinson, you're on.
Phil.
Need to unmute, Phil.
Yay, at last. Which question do you want, Sally?
There's a presupposition in that, Phil.
Yeah. Well, let's start with could you encourage an in-time perceiver to use tote?
Okay.
Forced out of the indecision.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of, would that work as a sort of protocol when someone who is a persistent, indecisive individual, an extreme perceiver? I've worked with many, and you know, they just can't seem to make their mind up. And I was just thinking that giving them the framework of you know, test, operate, etc., that might be something that they could then internalize, that might help them, ground them into start making decisions. I don't know.
Yeah, so with the test, operate, test, exit, what we're talking about there is NLP strategies. So obviously the decision-making strategy. So is it possible for somebody to have an ineffective decision-making strategy? Yeah. Equally, it's to do with their convincer strategy as well, which might be, they might have never convinced, as an example. Or they might have a long period of time or a high number of times convincer. So there's a number of different things here. The first thing I would do is to elicit their timeline. If I was going to do something that was, find out something really fast,
Mhm.
I would elicit their timeline. And if they're in time, as in front to back, I'd then say, is it really important for you to keep your options open? And if it is that, they go, yeah, sometimes.
They might say, and I'm thinking of someone in particular, well, it really depends on the circumstance.
Yeah, that's in time perceiver. So you've already got the answer, I think. So then, working with the decision-making strategy, with any of those kind of things, isn't really going to make that much difference.
Oh, okay.
We just need to change their timeline around so it looks like they've got bull horns, rather than a javelin through their head.
Like we did in Chelsea about 30 years ago, when we all changed from perceiver to judger, or for my case, from judger to perceiver. I don't know if you recall that.
Yeah, I do. I certainly do. That was, when was that? 1994, that was.
I know. I think
28 years ago. 28 years ago.
It was only your second NLP course.
Yeah, it was, yeah. Yeah, my second NLP practitioner training ever.
Good.
So, Phil, did you have does that answer that question for you?
Yeah, it does. The other one was I think let me scroll back and find it. It was something about success and failure. I get really quite stressed up about big successes that come off, rather than fearing failure. Can't find the darn question now. Sally, could you help me find it? No, it wasn't a question.
Yeah, I'm just looking for it.
Yes, so am I. Yeah, it wasn't the ENTJ thing. Well, okay. Basically, what I'm saying is I tend to get stressed up much more about what happens if I see it as sometimes threatening by succeeding at some really big stuff, rather than be threatened by, oh my God, if I don't do this, this won't happen. What I tend to get a bit stressed about is, oh my God, what happens if this does happen? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. So then this is, again, well, it's not really strictly speaking NLP, but from a SMART goals perspective, you would tend to have fear or worry about achieving a goal if inside of you, in your perspective, the goal wasn't ecological.
All right. Okay.
Yeah. So you might go like, whoa, if I achieve this goal and I pull this off, it's going to damage my health. It's going to damage my relationships. It's going to damage my family. It's going to damage other areas of my business.
Spot on. You answered it.
So that doesn't mean to say that it's not the goal to go for. It's just that the way it's expressed brings up those kind of concerns from your unconscious mind. And I think a lot of people, what they do in their life is they go, well, I could have this, or I could have this. And so they go, if I have this, then obviously I can't have this. Let's say somebody, I'm not saying this is you, this is just me giving you an example. Let's say that somebody goes like, well, I can either have a successful business or I can have a fulfilling relationship. So then they go, okay, so if I have set a goal for having a fulfilling relationship, then I can't have a successful business. Or if I set a goal for a successful business, then I can't have a fulfilling relationship. But, what I do with people who do that is I go like, okay, just replace the word or with and.
Mm-hmm.
And then they go, I can have a successful business and I can have a fulfilling relationship. And then they go, no, I can't have that because. And that's what brings a limiting decision to the surface. Get rid of that, then they can have both.
Okay,
Yep.
thanks.
Cool. Good question, Phil. Any other?
Okay, Andy Donovan. You're up with your question, please.
Andy, whereabouts are you on this?
Yeah, hi. Oh, hi. Can you see me?
Yep.
Oh, yes, you've just gone.
Yeah.
Yes, the board is on green. I can see you now.
Yeah, it's okay. So the question is, I'm definitely more intuitive and feeler, but my job requires me to get into details and facts that I find boring, and I find that and I miss details, and it's cost me. It got me to a big argument with before, but I just missed it because I was not interested. And I wonder how I can become more thinker and sensor.
Yeah. So sensor is more detailed, whereas intuitor is more global.
Yeah.
And that video that I put up in the Real World NLP and HUNA community last week around the hierarchy of ideas, then ideally you'd want to have flexibility to move between one extreme to another. So if somebody who's more intuitor and they want to become more sensor, then they need to become comfortable and adept at chunking down.
How do you do that?
What you do you know the meta model?
Yes.
Yeah. So what you do is you meta model everything you think for a week,
I didn't know that.
and that will open up that other neurology, if you like.
But I want to like to enjoy that and to be more passionate about that.
Yeah, I mean, to enjoy it and passionate is about going like, okay, so how will my life change when I'm able to chunk down into the detail comfortably?
Okay.
Yep.
I like that.
Then thinker feeler. Thinker is about dissociated, feeler is associated.
Yeah.
So you're saying you're more feeler, so then
Yeah.
the thing would be to dissociate, step outside of yourself.
Become more robotic. Like.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's how we go about changing those. Again, there is in c21nlp.com on personality matrix.
Yeah.
There is a CD, I think it's Meta Programs CD number 3, around how do you go about changing meta programs. But that's essentially how you change those two.
Right. Okay. I will build in
Pragmatically. Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
And Lisa, can you ask your question, please?
Lisa, okay, yeah, you need to unmute.
Unmute. Okay, sorry. So what about if a person doesn't like getting caught up in too many details and makes a decision and decides to just go for it with just very, very basic goal points, if you like, and just goes for it, and then once it's achieved, tweak it along the way if it's not exactly how they wanted it. So what kind of, what kind of person is that?
Well, I mean, I think that's a lot about what we've been talking about so far, is about, having a detailed, specific goal,
Yeah,
which is what you want and when you want it,
yeah,
but then letting go of the detail of the how.
yeah,
So, we talked about that a good few sessions ago, and
Yeah.
I know, like, well, Roger's here, and Mark, who doesn't come to the sessions, but he'll be watching them.
yeah.
That they always have this real need
So
for a
that
detailed plan,
Yeah,
and no, you don't need detail with that. In fact, I think both Roger and Mark said, in fact, all the things that they got a really detailed plan for, they didn't achieve. And the ones
that's true, actually. I found that true. That's why I just go for it now.
Yeah. But, go for something specific.
Yeah,
You don't need to know how specifically you're going to achieve it when you set the goal.
right.
And then, I go, and if it's within 80%
Yeah,
of what you asked for or what you
Yeah,
went for,
that's
celebrate.
That's good. Yeah. And then you can tweak along the way. And so would that be an internal person with a bit of external, or totally internal?
I think the thing that we're looking at really here, and these are great questions, Lisa. So thank you for that. It's again around flexibility.
Yeah,
It's about being more judger when you set the goal, and being more perceiver when you do the goal, when you take the action.
yeah,
From what Napoleon Hill's talking about here, and what we've talked about, if somebody absolutely needs to check their ideas with other people, or absolutely needs, think about this: need is always away from, want is always towards. So if somebody needs to talk to somebody about it, or needs to check it with somebody else, that's actually an example of inflexibility.
right. Okay.
So it's about becoming flexible enough to go like, okay, this is what I want, and that's it. That's just it. I'm okay with just sitting with that myself. And the only time that anybody would know that I'd set the goal is when I've achieved it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
great. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you.
Okay, and Tim, you're up with your question next, please.
Hi, Tim.
Hey, so I'm pretty sure I'm a perceiver,
Okay.
and my timeline, in my experience, goes from left to right, past to my left, future to my right. Yeah, if I'm a perceiver, that sounds different to what you were saying earlier.
Right.
Or is it just because I'm stepped out of the timeline, I'm not in it?
So, we talk about through time, in time, and archetypal behaviors that go with those. But also we have values and beliefs which interact with that. So from my timeline orientation, I'm more perceiver than judger. Which would, from a pure timeline orientation point of view, would go that I would be late. But I'm never late. I'd rather be half an hour early than 1 minute late. But then, a high value for me in business is professionalism. and being late is unprofessional. So that overrides my timeline orientation. One of my highest values in life is respect. And being late isn't respecting somebody. So I will always be on time. Whereas I've come across people who are totally through time, but they're always late. So you've got to look at the values and beliefs as well. If you look at the whole thing, so this is really now getting into kind of like breakthrough session kind of territory. When we're looking at the whole thing, but equally, you could have somebody who's through time and they've had some experiences in the past where they made quick decisions and they backfired and they got burnt as a result. So then they went,
Yeah.
It's not a good idea to make quick decisions.
Yeah, that sounds right.
So even though they're through time, basically, when we make a decision and we follow through with it, sometimes it's going to work out, sometimes we're going to get burnt. It doesn't mean it wasn't a good decision. Just meant it didn't work out, right? So as long as you're on the upside of the curve, that more of the decisions you make work out than the ones that don't work out, then overall you're winning. But I think that can also overlay the general things that we've talked about.
Okay, that's interesting. And aside from what I've just asked, that question, in relation to what you said a few weeks ago about not having a plan B, as in not having nothing to fall back on.
Yeah.
I've actually decided to sell all my properties. I've sold one of them. I'm just about to put another one on the market. And this will ultimately result in me having, a significantly reduced income from where I am, certainly a serious dent in 6 figures, and will result in the breakup of my relationship. So, I'm going for it.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to tell you my goal because of what you said tonight. So,
I've got a student of mine, a friend of mine, and he won't mind me saying this because he actually said it in a podcast a couple of weeks or months ago. His name's Patrick Murphy, and he came and did practitioner training with me, and left on the Friday night. On the Saturday, he told his wife he wanted a divorce, and on the Monday he left his job. And now he's hugely successful business. Actually, interestingly, he's just moved to Portugal. That's where he lives now. Gorgeous wife, gorgeous kid. A number of seriously nice properties in southwest London, and he puts it all down to the practitioner training. And then going home and going like, right, I want a divorce. Then going in, speak to his boss saying, right, I'm leaving. Going off to do my own thing. So,
yeah, big decisions.
There you go.
Cool. Okay, thank you.
Yep. Go for it, Tim. Go for it.
Okay, and Sean, where are you, lovely? You're up, please.
Hi, David.
Oh, there you are. Yes, got you.
Sally, you may need to help me out because I had to jump on another laptop and I've lost all the chat. So I can't remember exactly what my question was, but I think you may have answered it when you answered Lisa's question. But yeah, Sally, if you could remind me what it was in case there was anything that I missed.
So it says, I'm not sure if I'm articulating this very well. I'm curious about how being a judger and planning fitting with having a plan and being willing to change it if it's not working. judger being more common when it comes to success in business, what is the relationship between making the external world fit the internal versus making the internal fit the external when it comes to flexibility and results?
Well, I think you already got it, is with flexibility.
Yeah.
So what we're looking at really with this kind of what we're doing here, and it, you know, I don't think this kind of existed at the time of Think and Grow Rich, is becoming kind of like a hybrid. In that, you know, well, certainly not even as far ago as Think and Grow Rich, you know, people used to think, well, this is who I am. And what, you know, Ted James, Wyatt Woodsmall's book, Timeline Therapy and the Basis of Personality, actually teaches us is that we are not our personality. We can change it. Because we're way bigger than our personality. And I think that's really what we've been talking about, but I think it's really come to the fore in this particular chapter. Is there are certain times when being, you said flexibility. I would add another word to that: functionality. Flexibility and functionality. So from a functional point of view, there are times when it'd be more functional to be more judger, and certain times when it'd be more functional to be perceiver. The majority of people don't think that way, and the majority of people don't know how to actualize that flexibility. Whereas what we're talking about here is actually, how do you go about doing that? So, you know, and I think it was actually Roger who came to this kind of like aha moment distinction a week or so ago when he said, okay, so what we're talking about is being judger when we're setting the goal, but being more perceiver in taking action. And that was absolutely right. Yeah. So, but flexibility, yep, definitely. Add another one there though, functionality.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you for that.
Yeah. It's okay, Sean.
Okay, and Frank, you have a question too, I believe.
Hi, Frank.
Hi, David. This has to do with talking about the fear of maybe getting what you want. I have a client who is looking to making some major changes in her life, and a big part of that is the limiting decision that she's not good enough, and we're working on that. What's also there, and it's coming out more as I'm listening to what you've been talking about, is a fear that if she makes a decision that's for her, that other people are going to suffer. So what I want to bring to her, and I love the idea about this and that instead of this or that, because I think that's part of it. And I really want to find out what's behind that. Any other suggestions as far as finding out what is really behind, what's really the structure of the problem, that if she creates what she wants, there's the fear that, you know, other people are going to suffer?
Well, could be a number of things around that. There could be a limiting belief, limiting decision about that. As in, you know, there might be in her unconscious mind a decision that if she gets what she wants, so it's going to be at the cost of other people.
Right.
You know, I quite often say to people, look, goal setting is a selfish process. That when you set a goal, you set it for yourself. And so it's selfish. Get over it. And, you know, but some people have to let go of that's selfish in deciding this is what I want. then, you know, I think I talked about this on the Breakthrough Session Masterclass when I was doing one of the veterans programs. I had this guy come up to me in a break, and he said, I hear you love guitars. And I went, you hear right. And he shows me a picture on his phone, and he showed me this most amazing electric guitar. And I'm looking at it and I'm going, that's got to be a $20,000 to $30,000 euro guitar. And I went like, wow. I said, you know, that's a beautiful, beautiful guitar. He said, yeah, I made it. I make guitars like that. And I'm like, whoa. I said, you know, that's got to be a £20,000, £30,000 guitar. He said, oh, I don't sell them. I just give them away to my friends. So I went like, hi, mate. Nice to meet you. I'm thinking, I'm in here. This is good. Because any of the ones he'd showed me, I would love to have in my collection. And then actually it was in the next segment that he said, look, you know, my problem is I can either be a luthier, you know, somebody who makes guitars and have a Lutherian business, or be my brother's carer. And his brother was a veteran. So he's got the word or in there, or I can be my brother's carer, and my brother is the most important thing in my life. So therefore I can't have a Lutherian business. And I said, okay, just say to me what you said before, but replace the word or with and. And he goes, well, I could either have a successful Lutherian business and be my brother's carer. And he suddenly goes, but I can't do that because.
Yep.
I said, right,
There it is.
that's
Yeah.
a limiting belief. We can get rid of that tomorrow, which he did. So now he actually sells his guitars, and he's his brother's carer. Unfortunately, I didn't manage to get one of those before he got rid of his limiting belief. But there we go.
Timing. Yeah, I love it. Yeah, I really want to run that by her. I suspect there's going to be a because in
Yep.
that.
There'll be, or here's another thing it could be a parts conflict. Could be. So then it depends whether it's a full-time problem or a part-time problem.
Yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned that. We already looked at that. She says it's a full-time conflict.
Right.
Well, yeah, definitely. It's not all the time. It's not full-time that she believes she's not good enough. Now there's the belief she's not good enough. That's not full-time. That is a parts. Now the other belief about others have to suffer if she gets what she wants, that I don't know.
Okay. So say, well, you know, if I get what I want, other people are going to suffer. Then I would just ask the question, are you sure?
Okay.
And if she goes, yeah, I'm sure, then that's a limiting belief. If she goes, well, sometimes I think I have things and other people don't suffer, and other times I don't, then you've got a parts conflict.
Cool. Great. Thank you.
Pleasure, Frank. Thanks for the question.
And that is all the questions, unless anybody's got anything else.
Wow, this really did turn out to be quite a masterclass, didn't it?
Mm-hmm.
All from one chapter, and it's a short chapter, actually. But a lot came out of that, so that's brilliant. Thank you. Useful session. Great stuff. Well, I shall get onto editing that recording so that you guys will get an email about that. And also for those who are unable to physically do the session, we'll see you on the recording. And again, you know, any other questions that come up, put them in the Real World NLP and HUNA community. Again, keep sharing that community so that you know, we get more people in there. We must be somewhere between 500 and 600 people by now, I think. But it would be great to hit 1,000 in that community. So you know, we keep sharing it, but please, if you got, I know somebody who might find this valuable, whatever, share it with them. And also, you know, they can on joining the group, they can also then get all the recordings of Think and Grow Rich so far, join us for the future ones, but also get you know, all the recordings for Perceptions Projection as well. And a lot of the other stuff I've been referring to, where there's more detailed content from an NLP point of view, is available on c21nlp.com. So that's a place where you can get more detailed stuff about meta programs and all those kind of things. So so thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week, same bat time, same bat channel, for the Real World NLP and HUNA community take on persistence. And yes, that's number 8.
Thank you.
Okay, see you guys.